A young man knocked on my door on a Tuesday in April, and when I opened it, he had tears standing in his eyes, and he held up an old photograph of my daughter, June, who had been dead for 40 years. And he said, "Grandma, I think you're my grandmother. I've been looking for you my whole life." And God forgive me, I let him in. I wept, and I pulled that stranger into my arms on my own front porch because I had buried my only child at 19, and I had no living kin left in this world. And here, it seemed, was a piece of June walked back to me out of the grave. Her grandson, my grandson, the family I had prayed 40 lonely years to have. I made him supper. I made up the spare room. I thanked the Lord on my knees that night for sending me, at the very end of my life, the one thing I'd given up ever having. What that young man did not know, as he sat at my table eating my cornbread and calling me Grandma, was that I had caught babies in this county for 40 years. I was the midwife up and down these hollers from before he was born, if he'd ever even been born. And a woman who has brought 400 souls into this world knows things about birth that cannot be faked. Things written in dates and bodies and blood. There was one small, impossible thing in his beautiful story. One loose thread, and I pushed it down for weeks because I wanted so badly to believe. But a midwife cannot unknow what she knows. And when I finally pulled that thread, the whole lovely lie came apart in my hands. And the lonely old woman he was so sure he'd fooled turned out to be the one thing he never counted on. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Opal. I'm 74 years old, and I live up a holler in the mountains of West Virginia, where the ridges go blue into the distance, and the fog sits in the valleys of a morning like milk in a bowl. And my nearest neighbour is a half-mile down a dirt road. I was a midwife here for 40 years. A granny midwife, they called us. The old kind. The kind that came before the hospital was an hour of bad road away and stayed long after. I walked these ridges in every weather, in the snow and the mud and the dark, with my bag, to sit with labouring women in cabins with no running water and bring their babies safe into the light. I caught 400 babies in this county, near about. I know every family on this mountain by the shape of their newborns' faces, because I am the one who first saw most of those faces, wet and squalling and brand new, before their own mothers did. I know which babies came early and which came late, which were big and which were frail, which mothers carried high and which carried low. A midwife learns a place all the way down to its blood. She knows who is kin to who, and how, and exactly when, better than the county clerk with all his books. Because the clerk only writes down what he's told. And the midwife was there in the room when it was true. I want you to hold on to that, because every single person in this story forgot it. The young man most of all. And for a few weeks of foolish, grieving joy, so did I. There is one thing I knew, a midwife's plain knowledge, that I'll come back to, because it's the thing that saved me. But you have to understand the loneliness first, the size of the hole that young man stepped into, or you'll judge me a fool, and maybe I was. But it was a fool made of grief, and that's a different thing than a simple fool. My husband was named Virgil. We were married 41 years. He cut timber and worked a little coal and kept us fed through years that weren't always kind. And he was a quiet, steady, good man who never once made me feel small for the doctoring I did, which in those days and in these mountains, where a woman was meant to keep to the house, was no small grace in a husband. He'd hitch the mule himself and carry my bag up a ridge in the black dark when a call came, and wait in the kitchen of some stranger's cabin all night so I wouldn't walk home alone at dawn. Virgil passed 9 years ago, in his own bed, with his hand in mine. And that was a hard grief, but a clean one. The grief of a long, good marriage ending in its proper season. The kind you're allowed to have. That was not the grief that hollowed me out and left the door standing open. The grief that hollowed me out came 40 years ago, and its name was June. June was my only child. We tried for more, and the babies wouldn't stay, and that was a sorrow. But then it wasn't, because June was enough. June was everything. A bright, laughing, dark-eyed girl. Her daddy's eyes exactly. The only baby I ever caught with my own 2 hands and pulled to my own chest. My June, born on a snowy night, with me both mother and midwife at once. And when June was 19 years old, she drowned in the New River on a church picnic, in the month of June, which has always seemed to me a particular cruelty of the Lord's, that her name and her dying month should be the same word I can't get through a calendar without. She went into the current after a little boy who'd been pulled under. The little boy lived. He's a grown man now, with grandbabies of his own that I caught. My June did not come back up. And I have lived 40 years inside the hole that left. 40 years of being a woman who outlived her own child, which is a thing the natural order is not supposed to allow. And when it happens anyway, it breaks a thing in you that never sets right, like a bone left unsplinted. So I had no grandchildren. I had no one to hand June's quilts down to, nor her photographs, nor the little wooden horse her daddy carved her, nor, God help me, her name. I was the very end of my line. Think on that a moment, because it's the whole of it. I was the woman who had peopled an entire county, 400 babies, 400 families that go on and on because of these hands. And I myself had no people at all. I'd catch a great-grandbaby for a family I'd been midwife to for 3 generations, and I'd hand that warm new child back to a room full of its kin. And then I'd drive home up my dark holler to an empty house. The end of my own line. And some nights, the unfairness of that sat on my chest so heavy I could scarcely breathe. That is the loneliness that young man knocked on. That is the door he found standing wide open. And I'm the one who'd left it open. Because what else is a heart that's lost everything supposed to do? Nail itself shut? Let me set my coffee down a minute. Because I've been talking a while, and it would warm me to know who's keeping an old woman company tonight. Wherever you are, whatever holler or city, leave it down below where I can see it. It gets quiet up here on the mountain. The kind of quiet that has a ringing in it, and a little company. Even the kind I'll never see is a true comfort. There now. Where was I? The open door, and the wolf that came through it smiling. He said his name was Cody, and he told it so well. Friends, so well. He said that June, before she died, had been in a kind of trouble, had borne a baby in secret and given it up to spare the family the shame, the way frightened girls were made to do in those days, and that he was that baby grown to a man, raised hand to mouth in foster homes down in Carolina, and that he had spent years and what little money he had searching for his real people, and that the long trail had led him at long last, up this holler to me. And he had the photograph of June. He held it in 2 hands like something holy. And he had her dark eyes. Or by the second day, I had made myself see them there. And he knew things, small, true things. The name of our church, the very year she died, that she'd loved horses and broke her arm falling off one at 12. I understand now, cold and plain, how he came by all of it. I know he read it off her gravestone and an old water-stained high school yearbook in the library, and the kind of public records any stranger can buy for a few dollars on a computer these days. I know he scouted me the way a hunter scouts a ridge before the season. Patient, unhurried, learning the worn places where I'd come and go, studying the sign of my grief. But that bright April Tuesday, standing on my porch, I did not hear a hunter. I heard the answer to 40 years of prayer spoken in a young man's voice. My June had left me something of herself in the world after all. My June had borne a child. And that child, all grown, had come home up the mountain to his granny. There is no lock in this world a key like that won't open, when it's cut to fit the one wound you've carried your whole life. I have to be fair, even now, even after everything, and walk through the rooms of how it happened, because I don't want you thinking I was simple. I was not simple. I was starving. There is a difference, and the con man knows it better than anyone, because starving is what he hunts for. A satisfied woman, a woman with a house full of family, she'd have asked him hard questions in the first hour. But a woman with a 40-year hole where her child should be, you don't hand her hard questions. You hand her a reason not to ask them. And she will help you build the lie with her own 2 hands, because the lie is the thing she's wanted her whole life. He didn't fool me. My grief fooled me. And he just held the door. He moved in within the month. To be close to the grandmother he'd missed his whole life, he said, and to help out an old woman alone up a mountain. And at first, I will not lie to you, it was the happiest I had been since before the river took June. I cooked for someone again. I set 2 plates. I had a voice in the house in the evening and a step on the porch and someone to say goodnight to. I dug out June's quilts and her photographs and the little carved horse, and I'd watch his face while he looked at them. And I told myself I saw her in the set of his jaw, in his dark eyes. I wanted to see her so badly that I did see her. The neighbors who came by, he charmed them stupid too. This soft-spoken young man who'd searched so long and found his old granny up a holler. Wasn't it a blessing? Wasn't it just like something on the television? For a few weeks, I was not the woman who outlived her only child. I was somebody's grandma, with a grandson under my roof. I cannot put into words what that was worth to me after 40 years. And that, of course, is exactly the measure of what it would cost me. Because then it began, the way these things always begin. So gradual and so reasonable that you find yourself helping it along. First it was small loans, 100 here, 200 there. He had a hard luck story about debts from his rough raising, and what is a little money between blood. Then the asks got bigger, and that's when he laid down the cruelest card in the whole deck. He told me, eyes brimming, that he had a little girl of his own back in Carolina, my great-granddaughter, June's own great-granddaughter, and that she was sick, bad sick, and the hospital bills were pulling him under. A great-granddaughter. He took June's blood and ran it down 2 more generations and put a sick baby at the end of it. A sick baby with June's eyes. And he dangled her in front of a woman who had spent 40 years of her life saving sick babies. I'd have signed away the mountain and the sky above it for that child. He knew I would. That was the whole point of her, because the mountain was where it was all heading, my land. He began to work on me, gentle as you please, about how I ought to get my affairs in order now that I had family again. How much simpler and safer it would be to put his name right on the deed alongside mine, and to make a new will, so that everything would pass clean and easy to him and the poor sick great-granddaughter, with no lawyers and no tangle if anything should happen to me. He even knew a notary, a friend of his, who'd come right out to the house and save me the long drive to town. And you have to understand what this land is. It looks like nothing, like rocks and timber and a played-out little farm. But there's gas under these mountains now, and the timber on top, and the old mineral rights. And a man who researches his prey knows the worth of the dirt a great deal better than the widow who's just been standing on it her whole life. He was never really after my coffee can of egg money, though he helped himself to that besides. He was after the land. He was after everything that should have been June's, every acre of her inheritance, taken by a stranger who'd put on her memory like a coat. And right about then, he started in on the other thing they always do. He began, so tenderly, to ease my old friends away from me. When my neighbour Edith, who'd known me 50 years, said something careful and doubtful about how awfully fast this had all come together, Cody came to me afterward, looking wounded to the soul, and told me that some people simply cannot bear to watch a lonely old woman finally get her family, that they go green with jealousy, and that I'd best be careful who I let drip poison into something this precious. And I, the old fool made of grief, I started holding my own dearest friends out at arm's length, the very people who'd loved me for half a century, to protect the lie. Because by then, the lie had become more precious to me than anyone telling the truth. That is the most diabolical part of the whole machine. They don't simply rob you. They get you to shove away with your own hands every single person who might save you, so that when the trap finally springs shut, there is no one left in the whole room but you and the wolf. But here is the thing he never once counted on, the one thing in all his careful hunting that he could not have known to be afraid of. I was a midwife for 40 years. It was a small thing, the first time he said it. It was nothing at all. And then it was everything in the world. He was at my table one evening, spinning the story out richer, the way they do once they think you're landed, and he told me, all proud and easy, the day he was born, and the place, a hospital down in Carolina, and the month and the year. And I sat there nodding and smiling and passing the cornbread, and somewhere down underneath all that smiling, the midwife in me, the part that has counted out 9-month calendars on her fingers 10,000 times, the part that cannot help itself, went quiet and went still. Because I knew when my June died, I have that date carved into me deeper than my own name, deeper than scripture. And I knew, the way only her mother and her midwife both could possibly know, the exact shape of June's last year on this earth, every week of it, because I had been beside her near every day of that year. And the birth date this young man had just handed me so proudly would have meant that my June was carrying a child through the very months I sat next to her at the supper table, the months before the river took her. And she was not carrying a child. There was no hiding such a thing from me. Of all the women alive, I was her mother, and I was a midwife 40 years, and I would have known it before she did. A girl cannot hide a pregnancy from the woman who delivered 400 babies and washes her clothes besides. There had been no baby. There had never, ever been a baby. The plain arithmetic of it was as pitiless and as certain as a due date. And all the wanting in the world, and I wanted it more than I have ever wanted anything, could not make those numbers come out any other way. That was the season I stopped sleeping. And I'll be honest with you, because this is the truest and the worst part. I tried, for 2 whole weeks, not to know it. That is what the loneliness will do to you. Because the very moment I let that arithmetic be true, I lost everything all over again. The whole world, twice in one lifetime. Not just the money, not just the land. I lost my grandson. I lost June's child. I lost the answered prayer and the 2 plates at supper and the step on the porch and the being somebody's grandma. And I went back, in the space of one held breath, to being the old woman who outlived her only baby and had nobody at all. And I would almost rather have been robbed down to the bare floorboards than go back into that hole. So I did the thing the human heart does when the truth costs too much. I argued with the numbers. Maybe I'd gotten the year wrong in my old head. Maybe June had hidden it even from me, somehow, some way. Maybe. He'd brought the deed papers by then, laid them on my table, and his notary was set to come that Friday, and I sat there one long night with the pen actually in my hand, and I came within a breath of deciding that I would sooner sign my whole mountain over to a lie that called me grandma than keep it and go back to being alone with the truth. The pen was on the paper. I had started to make the A of my own name. And then I thought of all the frightened, labouring women I had sat beside for 40 years. And the one thing I told every last one of them when the fear got hold of them, I told them, the body does not lie. The dates do not lie. You can want and pray and wish until you're hoarse, but a baby comes when a baby comes. And the truth of a birth is written down in a place no story and no wishing can ever reach. 40 years I had told other women to trust what was true over what they wished were true. And I set the pen down, because I could not have spent 40 years a midwife and then turn coward before the plainest arithmetic of my own life at 74. The numbers were true. There had been no baby. And the smiling young man asleep in my spare room was no part of my June. He was a wolf, and I had opened my own gate to him. And now there was nothing left to do but be smarter than my own poor, broken heart. I want to slow down here, because this is where the midwife stopped grieving and started working. I did not confront him. You do not confront a wolf in your own kitchen at 74 years old, half a mile of dirt road from your nearest neighbour. I had birthed enough babies on enough dangerous nights to know in my bones when the time is to be still and watch, and when it's to move. So I did the hardest acting of my whole long life. I went right on being his doting, foolish old granny, kept on smiling, kept patting his hand, kept stalling on the deed with one excuse after another. Oh, my eyes are too tired to read it tonight. Oh, let me just understand it proper first. You know how slow I am. While underneath all that smiling, I went to work with everything that 40 years of reading bodies and dates and records had put into me. I drove, alone, to the county seat, telling him I had a doctor's appointment. And I started pulling the threads, quiet and patient, the way you ease a breech baby. No sudden moves. There were no birth records anywhere of my June ever bearing a child, naturally, because there had never been a child. But once I knew to look, and once a sharp, kind young woman at the courthouse named Brenda took pity on a confused-seeming old lady and helped me search the wider records on her computer, something else rose up out of the screen that stopped my breath. There were other Opals. 3 of them that we turned up that first afternoon, scattered across these mountains and over the line into Kentucky. Lonely old widows, every one, who had each had a long-lost grandson appear at the door in the last few years, with an old photograph and a tearful story and a sick child somewhere needing money, and who had each been emptied out, 2 of them nearly losing their homes before somebody caught it. The young men in the few photographs didn't all look the same. He worked with others, or he wore different names like different shirts. But the shape of it, the pattern, matched like a thumbprint pressed in the same soft clay. He was not my grandson. He was a trade, a profession, a thing that traveled holler to holler, harvesting the loneliest woman in each one. And I had simply been the next field, ready for cutting. And still I did not call him out. Instead, I drove to the state police barracks, and I sat down across a desk from a serious, decent trooper named Sergeant Mullins, and I laid the whole of it out in order. The dates that couldn't be, the impossibility written in my own daughter's calendar, the 3 other women, the deed he was pressing me to sign that very Friday with his own pet notary in tow. The sergeant listened to all of it, and then he looked at me for a long moment, a little grey-headed midwife with a folder of papers, and he said, "Ma'am, I've worked these cases. Most folks figure this out a year, and their whole life savings too late, if they ever figure it out at all. You caught it before you signed a thing. How in the world did you do that?" And I told him the plain truth. I said, "Sergeant, I caught babies in this county for 40 years. I know down to the week when a child was born and when it wasn't." He went hunting for the loneliest old woman in 3 states. And he had the bad luck to pick the one who'd spent her whole life keeping the calendar. So we let Friday come, and I want you to hold on to this picture, because it is the one I keep for myself on the hard nights. Cody and his slick, smiling notary sat down at my kitchen table that Friday morning with the deed that would have signed my mountain and my June's whole memory over to a stranger. The both of them grinning, telling me again what a blessing it all was, how proud June would surely be looking down. And I poured the coffee, calm as a creek, and I did not sign one single thing. I just said, soft as you please, that I'd had a question or 2 answered this week, and that I'd ask a few folks to come by and meet my grandson. And my front door opened, and Sergeant Mullins came through it with 2 troopers behind him, and the smile slid right off that young man's face like rainwater off a tin roof. The last I ever saw of Cody, whatever his true name turned out to be, he was being walked down my own porch steps in handcuffs, right past the rocking chair where I had let myself believe, for a few sweet, stolen weeks, that I had family in this world again. They charged him for the 3 women who came before me, and for the others we hadn't even found yet. And he will be a long, long time in a place where he cannot knock on one more lonely door. I'm 74 years old, and I have had to bury my June twice now, which is a thing I would not have believed a body could live through. The first time, the river took her, and that was God's doing, or nature's, terrible but clean, the kind of loss the whole world helps you carry. The second time, a stranger took her. He dug her up out of 40 years of my grief and dangled her in front of me like bait on a hook. My own daughter, and let me hold her again for a few weeks. And then, when the trap sprang, he took her away a second time. And this loss the world does not help you carry. Because the world doesn't even understand that you've lost anyone, since she was never there. I had to set down, all over again, the grandson I never had, and the sick little great-granddaughter who was never sick because she was never born, and the cooking for two, and the step on the porch. And I had to walk back into a house gone quiet and grieve a whole family that had only ever lived inside a con man's mouth. I won't pretend to you that the second burying wasn't its own particular hell. For weeks after the troopers took him, the silence in this house was worse than it had ever been in 9 years of widowhood. Because now, I knew exactly what that silence had spent a few sweet weeks pretending it could be. And pretending is a cruelty all its own once you know. But here is what I have come to, and it is the whole reason I'm sitting here talking to you tonight instead of sitting bitter in the dark. I will not let him make me hard. That is the very last thing they take from you, if you let them. The open door of your own heart. And I have decided, with what years I've got left, that he does not get that one too. He got a few months and some egg money. He does not get my heart. So I keep it open, same as always. I have only learned, late and at a price, to keep my eyes open right alongside it. And the great surprise of my old age is that those two things were never enemies after all. You can love with your whole heart and still ask the hard question. I wish somebody had told me that at 50. And I have found family after all, the real kind. The kind that doesn't come knocking and claiming your blood. The kind that simply shows up and then keeps showing up. Edith, the neighbor I'd let him push away from me, forgave me before I'd even finished apologizing. And we're thicker now than we've been in years. Two old women who know exactly how much we've got and haven't got left. Brenda, the young woman from the courthouse, drives all the way up my holler now just to sit on the porch with me. And last spring, a frightened, pregnant girl from down the road, 16 years old and alone and with not one soul in this world to help her, knocked on my door in the night. And I took her in, and I sat with her through her labor the way I did it in the old days. And I caught her baby with these same two hands. The 401st soul I've pulled into the light. That child is no kin of mine by one drop of blood, but she calls me Granny. And her mama is learning to quilt off of June's own patterns spread out on my floor. And when I am gone, this mountain and everything on it goes to that girl and her baby, free and clear and lawful. Signed at my own kitchen table, where the wolf once laid his papers. And I will tell you something for nothing. No stranger with a photograph and my dead daughter's eyes could ever, in 100 years, have given me what those two just walked up the holler and gave me. Asking for nothing at all. People think the cruelest con is the one that takes your money. But I've learned there's a worse one. The one that takes the thing you wanted most in all the world and turns out to have been a lie. He didn't just try to steal my land. He sold me my own dead daughter back for a few weeks and made me pay for her in installments. And then she died again when it ended. That is a cruelty I didn't know was in the world until it sat at my table eating cornbread. So if you're out there tonight and you're lonely, the deep kind, the kind that's lost somebody it can never get back, let me tell you what 40 years of catching babies and one wolf at my own table taught me. Your longing for family is not foolish. Hear me on that, because the shame of it is half of what keeps the wolves fed. That longing is the most human and the most holy thing about you. The proof that you loved somebody all the way, and you have nothing in this world to be ashamed of for feeling it. But hear me on this, too, because it's the part that costs. That very longing is the exact door the wicked come knocking on, because they know better than anyone that an open, aching heart doesn't stop to ask questions. So when somebody appears out of nowhere, holding the one thing you've wanted your whole life long, especially then, especially when it's the answer to 40 years of prayer, that is precisely the moment to keep your heart open and your eyes open both at once. You ask the hard question, even when, most of all when, you are terrified of the answer. You check the dates. You make the drive to the courthouse, because the body doesn't lie, and the records don't lie, and the truth doesn't lie. No matter how badly, how desperately, you would rather hold the beautiful lie instead. And if some wolf ever does pick your door, you hold your grey head up high, because being lonely was never your shame, and being hunted for it was never your failing. The shame is his, every ounce of it. It always, always was. If this story found you tonight, stay a while, and I'll have another for you soon. And tell me down below, have you ever been offered the very thing you wanted most, only to find it wasn't real? And how did you find your feet again? I read every single one. Take care of yourself, and keep your heart open and your eyes open, both at once.